It has been a year. 1 year ago, I stood on this bima to give a sermon I thought no one wanted to hear about the ways that our voices and perspectives as Jews were being drowned out by louder, more organized Jewish voices, voices pursuing an agenda that does not represent us. A year ago today, you were on your feet. You stood and cheered for the idea that we in this congregation are living the Judaism of our time, an inclusive, pluralistic, multiracial, feminist, LGBT-embracing, cultural, liberal, progressive, justice-focused Judaism. That a black hat doesn't make a person more Jewish, just like being a man doesn't make a person more Jewish. That cultural Judaism is Judaism. That Reform Judaism is good Judaism. You stood and cheered here on Rosh Hashanah for owning and claiming and proudly asserting your identity, legitimacy, and values as Jews. You cheered for a vision of Judaism that includes the full spectrum from secular to Haredi. A vision of a people who unite across our differences to fight anti-Semitism and make the world more whole. Days later on the street, you'd chant back to me, "No one is more Jewish than you. There's no such thing as being half Jewish. Why, yes, I am Jewish." You were into it. I imagined a lot of things in that sermon. I imagined a full repentance for anti-Semitism by the entire world. Go big or go home. I imagined a teshuvah process by all responsible parties for perpetuating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a full acknowledgement of both people's history and right to live in the land. I did not imagine, none of us imagined what would happen exactly 3 weeks later. When you walked out of here with those stickers in your hand, ready to proudly proclaim your Judaism, we did not imagine decapitated babies. We did not imagine mutilated women. We did not imagine immolated families. We did not imagine the abyss of ruthless barbarity by Hamas. We did not imagine more than 230 innocent people, infants to elders, taken at gunpoint into tunnels. We could not imagine that 1 year later, 101 of them would still be captive somewhere in or under Gaza. We did not imagine the displacement of the entire north of the country under constant shelling by Hezbollah and Iran. We did not imagine a few weeks ago, even, full-on war with Hezbollah and Iran. 180 ballistic missiles firing on Israel, all of our loved ones in bomb shelters as the missiles rained down, and that we'd enter Rosh Hashanah in a heightened state of war. This is a truly terrifying time for our wider Jewish family. We could not imagine the hellscape of Gaza, flattened to the ground. The massive scale of the killing, whole families of 20, 40 dead, children, mothers, tens of thousands, a country of orphans, wounded, amputated, grieving, homeless, starving, fleeing again and again for a year, still now. We did not imagine that our neighbors here in New York would justify and celebrate the deaths of our people. We did not imagine swastikas in Times Square on October 8th. We did not imagine the floods for Gaza down Eastern Parkway, graffiti in front of our sanctuary steps, slogans carved into the wood of our benches. We did not imagine college encampments across the country focused on us. We did not imagine that Jews would be fearful to send their kids to college. We did not imagine that 79 years after the Holocaust, and months after the worst pogrom since the Holocaust, we would become the villain of the cause of this generation, many of whom simply, urgently seek Palestinian safety and freedom, some of whom seek our people's removal from our ancient home. even those of us who've been critical of the Israeli government, did not imagine how it would behave during the war in Gaza. The willingness to wipe out human life, including innocent human life, at a stunning scale and speed. The lack of prioritization of the hostages and their families. The rationalization of collective punishment. The imperviousness to American demands and the world's horror. The cynical use of war for political and personal ends. Our whole country, this whole world, is talking about us, the Jewish people. Though we are 0.2% of the world's population, and though Israel is 0.014% of the world's landmass, Jews and Israel are in the headlines every day. The right has people who blame us for the world's problems with recycled Nazi ideas of our polluting influence. The left has people who blame us for the world's problems by making us the planet's uber villain, by erasing our history and our humanity and distorting our people's existential need to go home into a colonialist project. The right has people who pretend to care about us, but are really using the fight against anti-Semitism as a weapon for partisan gain. The left has LGBT people and feminists and people who believe in human rights, who identify with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian government, surely misunderstanding what they stand for. The whole country, the whole world, spent this year debating whether the one Jewish nation in the world has a right to exist, whether murdering us is justified, and what to think or do about the mass subjugation and murder of Palestinians that our people has perpetrated and is perpetrating. Every one of you represented the Jewish people this year, whether you liked it or not, in 100 conversations over dinner and out for drinks and at the water cooler and on social media and in the boardroom and with your partner and with your children and with your parents and with your grandparents and with your grandchildren and with your Israeli cousins and friends and with your non-Jewish cousins and friends and with your right-wing uncle and your left-wing niece and your Muslim and your Arab friends and your kids' friends' parents and the guy behind the counter. So maybe sometimes you avoided that conversation. And maybe sometimes it felt like the other person did not care whether Jewish people live or die. And maybe sometimes it felt like the other person did not care whether the Jewish people held on to a scrap of morality or integrity. And maybe sometimes they said things you didn't respond to, you just couldn't, and it still eats at you. And maybe sometimes it hurt so deeply that you felt like no one would ever understand you or what it is like to be a Jew. And maybe sometimes it alienated you so completely, you felt like there would never be a place for you among the Jewish people. And maybe sometimes you just wanted to cry. And maybe your own views changed many times this year. Perhaps you were vacillating, trying to hold it all. The gaping terror of Israelis living on that narrow strip, surrounded on all sides, freshly aware of what their enemies are capable of, who've never had a single year without war or threat of war, without terror attacks, not a single year of being acknowledged by their neighbors as having a right to live in their ancient home. And the utter devastation of Palestinians who just want to go home, who just want to be safe, who just want to be free, who also have been living in a constant state of siege with knocks on the door in the middle of the night and imprisonment and torture and humiliation and mob violence. And maybe some of your relationships broke. And maybe there are people you're not speaking to, people you may never speak to again. And maybe there are people you've been avoiding because you don't want to have this conversation. You cannot bear it. You don't think your relationship will survive it. This was a very difficult year to be a Jew. How do we go about living this next year as a Jewish people? We start with these very days. On this day, Yom Hadin, God is sitting on God's throne of judgment. The Midrash tells us that God will move from the throne of judgment to the throne of compassion as we take responsibility for our actions. How will the Jewish people be judged? How will we judge ourselves? The ritual of Slichot of last Saturday night and again on Yom Kippur is first mentioned in a compilation of medieval midrash called Tana Devet Eliyahu Zuta. In this midrash, God is having a conversation with King David. And David knows that one day the temple will be destroyed, and he's worried about how the Jewish people will seek atonement when that time comes. God tells David that when troubles come upon Israel, the entire people should stand before God as a single unit, ba'agodat achat, and make a confession. Over these 10 days, the Jewish people across the earth are gathered ba'agodat achat, to stand en masse before God and pray the same words in the first person plural, each identifying ourselves with the collective, all making confession, all seeking forgiveness, asking ourselves, how did we get here? What was our role? What could we have done differently? Here are some suggestions. For years, we looked away from the rockets hitting Sderot, from Hamas tunneling underground. We knew, but each time the flare-ups ended, we looked away. For years, most of us looked away from the growing threat of Iran and its armies on all sides. When we looked that way at all, we focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and not the larger war. For years, we looked away from the conditions of Gaza after Israel withdrew in 2005. 2 million people trapped, the unemployment, the hunger, the growing rage. We knew, but we looked away. For decades, we looked away from the West Bank. As settlements expanded, as land theft, abuse of power, and a dual, unequal system of justice became normalized, as settler extremists from a banned political party took over the state of Israel, and as the Israeli public moved so far to the right that politicians could not speak of a Palestinian state. For decades, we allowed all of our major organizations, synagogues, and schools to teach an incomplete story of Israel and to silence criticism of Israel. We allowed them to define loyalty as blind allegiance, and when our youth asked questions or tried to raise the alarm, we called them self-hating Jews, giving them no place of acceptance in the Jewish world and creating a vacuum that was filled by the illiberal left. For years, we allowed right-wing and Orthodox interests to claim the mantle of Jewish authority, to pull our national organizations to the right, to speak for us, to present a distorted picture of American Jewry, and to support and fund reactionary, theocratic, and Jewish supremacist forces in Israel. For years, we looked away from anti-Semitism on the left. When people we thought of as allies were anti-Semitic or excluded Jews, we excused it. We avoided confronting it. We brushed it off. We looked away. And when our own people called it out, we said they were overreacting. And this year, the most obvious confession is to the mass killing and collective punishment of innocents and the dehumanization that enabled it. You may have other different confessions you think we ought to make as a people. What we do on these 10 days is we confess in the collective, and then we imagine who we want to be, how we want to be different. First of all, we have to decide to be Jewish, to live a Jewish life however we define it, to see ourselves as part of the Jewish community. This year, I spoke to congregants who, in anguish, were considering leaving the Jewish community and not raising their children as Jews because they are so ashamed of how our people have behaved this year. And I talked to congregants who removed all outward Jewish symbols from their bodies and their homes out of either shame or fear of anti-Semitism, fear of being judged, fear of being harmed. That shame, that fear, they're real. And there are Jews who are choosing to put their heads down and blend in. I think all of us can relate to that a little bit. It's really hard to be a Jew right now. But for most of us, blending in is not an option. We either can't or we refuse to. We're Jews. Even though it can be difficult sometimes, we love being Jewish. We're proud of our tradition, of our history, of our culture, of our people. When the Jewish people stand before the world as a single unit, we want the Jews who share our values, inclusive, pluralistic, liberal, cultural, justice-oriented Jews, the majority of Jewish New York, the majority of Jewish Americans, the majority of Jews around the world, to be visible, to be seen in this Agudat Achat called the Jewish people, to be heard. And we know that if we're not careful, that shame and that fear could send our people in dangerous directions. There are some whose shame is leading them to lose all empathy for their fellow Jews, and even to side with forces seeking our destruction. And there are some whose fear is telling them that this country, the most welcoming harbor in Jewish history, is not safe for us anymore. Out of their sense of betrayal, there are Jews who are giving up on America, on the unfinished work of joining with other minorities for a shared vision of democracy with rights for all. Giving up on the belief that civil liberties and equality is not only what's best for other Americans, but it's also what's best for us. Some Jews are saying that anti-Semitism is so endemic that there's no future for us in those coalitions. The anti-Semitism on the left is shockingly deep and widespread. But we are simply too small to go it alone. We need friends. And if we look again, we see we have friends and potential friends who are troubled by anti-Semitism, who also seek to be understood in this country, who know that the conflict in Israel is complex, and who are open to listening and true partnership. And in the meantime, we've raised generations of Jews who believe that their Judaism is inextricably intertwined with freedom and justice for all. They are not wrong to feel this way. Our ancestors chose Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, to be our central story, so that the most often repeated mitzvah in the Torah would be to not oppress the stranger. If we would like our kids to be proud of us, if we would like our kids to carry our Torah into the future, we must stand for the values we taught them. And how do we do that while also standing with Israel? By looking at all that we've been looking away from, by being non-binary, both pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian. Both peoples have a history and right to live in that land. Both peoples deserve safety and freedom. And by supporting the people on the ground who have not given up on working together for equality and peace. Just last Friday, we hosted Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun, the largest grassroots peace movement in the region. Just 10 days ago, we hosted Hamza Eloudeh, the Palestinian peace activist who partners with Israeli Maoz Inon. Maoz lost both of his parents on October 7th. And out of that grief, he has dedicated his life to peace. And when people say to Maoz that peace building is naive, he says, those who believe that bombs will bring safety, they are naive. When Sadat and Begin negotiated, 60% of Israelis were against negotiations. We must not underestimate the power of dreaming there will be peace between the river and the sea. We are the leaders of the future, no one else. We stand with Israel by standing with these courageous leaders and so many others like them. And we stand with Israel by criticizing Israel when it deserves criticism. Remember the ad council campaign? Friends don't let friends drive drunk? Well, friends don't let friends drive their country off a cliff. Criticism is what loyalty looks like. American leaders who say that they're defending the Jewish people from anti-Semitism by targeting all criticism of Israel while encouraging Israel to dismantle democracy, abuse Palestinians, and become a pariah state are actually endangering Israel and the Jewish people. Defending the north of Israel against Hezbollah and defending all of the country against Iran and the Houthis is necessary. The Jewish people have nothing against the innocent people of Lebanon, or Yemen, or Iran. And watching from here, we can't bear any more innocent lives lost. And we would be terribly foolish to believe that this escalation, however defensible, won't create new enemies for Israel. However, Israel has the right to defend itself against foreign actors that are trying to destroy it. Any country would. But the occupation and annexation of the West Bank and Gaza are indefensible. Even as a response against the Hamas attack was justified, this government has put us in a position of having to repeatedly denounce its immoral acts while simultaneously trying to defend it from slander. Just as we must criticize Israel when warranted, we must criticize anti-Semitism on the left always. Our work in this coming year is to call upon other minority groups and progressive leaders to reckon with anti-Semitism and to explicitly include Jews in their vision for America. 2 CBE members, leaders of New York Jewish Agenda, worked this year to arrange a public conversation with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, in which she committed to take on anti-Semitism in a serious and sustained way. And she has. She lost support of many on the left, but she remains resolute and is committed to uplifting the majority of liberals and progressives who are in no way anti-Semitic. This will be the beginning of a wave of progressive leaders who start to take on anti-Semitism within their ranks, and we can be part of making that happen. In some ways, this is the worst time for American Jews, but in other ways, it's the best of times. Right now, on the biggest stage in American politics, we're witnessing a multiracial Jewish family where all kinds of people are included and loved, and we're part of it. We've never seen that at the center of the American story before. There's no escaping that this whole country is making judgments about who we are and what we stand for based on what they see in a context suffused with anti-Semitism. We can either be part of shaping that story, or we can leave it to others who do not represent our values. Just when it might seem risky or shameful to be visibly Jewish, this is when your people need you most. We need each other. Precisely because it is so difficult to be a Jew right now, we need Jewish visibility. We need to see Jews like us wearing Jewish stars on the subway and at the PTA meeting and at the Pride Parade and at the office and at the block party. People you wouldn't think would wear a Jewish star, saying, yeah, this is what a proud Jew looks like. Because I can simultaneously denounce the settler movement and love being a Jew. Our story is being told right now. Our history is being written. And your face, your voice, your values, your example need to be part of that story. We are Jews who are bound up with other Jews. We are an agudat achat, a single unit tied together in a covenant of mutual responsibility. We are Jews who will not hide, who will not be silent, who will not allow others to speak for us. We are Jews who will demand that action taken in our name, in the name of our people, be moral action. We are the Jewish people who do not oppress the stranger, who pursue justice, who stand for life. We are the Jewish people who take drops out of our cups to mourn the death of even Pharaoh. We are Jews who don't agree with each other, who don't agree with our rabbi, who don't agree with something that was just said. We include Jews who want the IDF to continue until Hamas and Hezbollah are obliterated. And we include Jews who called for a ceasefire in October. But we are Jews who've decided to stay in it together because we are Jews who know we need each other. We are Jews who know that our people deserve a safe place to live in our ancient home, and we are Jews who will not allow legitimate criticism of Israel to be called anti-Semitism. And we are Jews who will no longer be silent about anti-Semitism anywhere. We are Jews who stand with the Israelis in the streets, who stand with the hostages, who count ourselves with the brave peace activists, who do not give up, who continue to fight for a future where all human beings count. We are Jews who will find our way to those difficult conversations with our neighbors on anti-Semitism, who will rebuild relationships and make new ones because we know we cannot go it alone. We are Jews who will write postcards and knock on doors and will do everything in our power to get every person out to vote in the most consequential election of our lives. We are Jews who understand that the only way to safety for our people is democracy with protections for all minorities. I have a present for you. It's a necklace with a Jewish star. Maybe you'll want to put it on today and see how it feels. Maybe you'll want to put it somewhere meaningful in your home and save it for another day. It's a way of saying to the world, why, yes, I am Jewish. This is what a Jew looks like. This is what a Jew stands for. This is how a Jew behaves. A year ago, I said this to you. Whatever kind of Jew you are, own it. Step up into it. Fall in love with it. Our history depends on it. You could be staunchly pro-Israel or extremely critical of Israel and still wear a Jewish star. You could be an atheist or God-questioning or a believer and wear a Jewish star. You could be from any country on the earth, of any race, any gender, any age, and wear a Jewish star. You could be queer, you could be straight, you could be metrosexual, if that is still a thing, and wear a Jewish star. You could have one Jewish grandparent or one Jewish parent or no Jewish parents and wear a Jewish star. You could be not Jewish, but living in a Jewish family and part of a Jewish community. And when someone asks you about your star, you could say, I am not Jewish, but I love people who are. And I'm wearing this because I care about the Jewish people. You could be Reformed, you could be Reconstructionist, conservative, Orthodox, unaffiliated, Israeli, you name it, and you can wear it. Go make us proud. Go be someone's Jewish story. Go be the reason someone falls in love with the Jewish people. Go be the face of inclusive, pluralistic, multiracial, feminist, LGBT-embracing, cultural, liberal, progressive, pro-Israeli, and pro-Palestinian, justice-focused, thriving 21st century Jewish life. Because no one on earth is more Jewish than you. Shana Tova.